Hello, hello, amigas, and welcome to Mujer Sagrada, Healing the Whole Woman. I'm Ayla, your community manager here at We All Grow Amigas, and your host for this very timely panel in celebration of Women's Health Month. Before we get started, I just want to sincerely thank you for being here with us today. This past month has been heavily flooded with bad news after bad news, and so we are honored to share space with you today, amigas. In times of grief, we seek our community, so thank you for choosing to be in community with us here and now in this moment. Today, we'll be discussing the sacred intersections of our wellness as women of color, and we have four very special and powerhouse mujeres who are paving the way for women's health, our spiritual care, womb wellness, and mental health. So I just want to pause and recognize how much power is in the room right now. You ladies are doing incredible and necessary work holding space for our comunidad. So thank you. You are healers, you are light workers, you are change makers, and you are shifting the paradigm for how we tend to our mind, body, and spirit, and how we heal ourselves. Reaching back and remembering who we are at our core is at the centerfold of all that you do. So thank you. All right, so this leads me to my first question. The work that you all do is layered and dances between academia and medicine and holistic and traditional healing. Can you talk about the work you are doing and how you are marrying your intuitive inner knowing with the formal training to serve your community? And we can start with Dr. Miguelina and Dr. Griselda.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you wanted to. Yeah, that was a great question to start. I think that what Miguelina and I are doing is a reflection of the larger paradigm shift that's taking place. And that is the need to integrate more divine femininity, and we're talking about energy here, not like gender, into masculine spaces and integrate divine masculinity into feminine spaces. And this is why my sister and I have been led, because a lot of us, I'm sure everyone on this panel could say that a lot of what we do is spirit-led, right? Led by intuition. And what we've learned to do is to adhere and listen to the guidance of intuition, and also combine that with our formal education. In our case, Miguelina and I are both trained social scientists. And what we've been led to create is a platform and experience where we can touch on, let's say, womb imbalances in the sacral chakra, which is, the second chakra from the spine down up. And that's where a lot of women, people with wombs, house a lot of the trauma they've experienced, both in this lifetime and intergenerationally. But then what Miguelina and I do is that we put that in a context of like racialized patriarchy and white supremacy. So teaching and learning about the way, let's say, the transatlantic slave trade and other forms of indentured servitude that our ancestors endured, how that plays into some of the traumas that we experience. So it is a delicate dance, because a lot of times people that come at our feet or to our spaces, not a lot of times, often feel comforted with resources to validate some of the stuff that we share. So I think that we are able to provide that through our academic training. And just briefly, sorry, I'm getting over a cold, something that's not COVID, it's not strep, that a lot of people seem to be navigating. But with us, it took us years to really begin to fine tune our platform, because I'm not gonna say to fine tune it, because this is a process. Because for a long time, we compartmentalized sections of ourselves, like our academic training with our spiritual upbringing in a Dominican household where our parents and our family practice the Afro-Indigenous way of life in the Dominican Republic, La 21 Divisiones, or the 21 divisions, along with Catholicism. And then becoming yogis, and then learning about womb wellness. And we dealt with these in these little compartments. And we learned, as Gris said, with the flow, that we had to merge these. And really at the beginning of the pandemic is when it really started to gel, when we realized that we did have to bring more of that divine feminine into the masculine academic space, but also bring more of that masculine energy into the spiritual space.
Beautiful. Wow. And thank you for mentioning that, like how these things are so isolated, but you've so beautifully been able to marry all of them into one space. And we need that as a people, because we exist in many of these spaces and we need to show up as our whole selves. So thank you for that. What about you, Pankezani?
Thanks for asking. And thank you to the Brujas. It's just amazing to see the two of you together as healers, as twins. You know, in Indigenous healing, there's so many creation stories about twins, twin heroes, twin healers. So it's just like so beautiful to be in space with you. So now that I got that out, I want to say that this takes me back to the first class that I taught that was formal, you know, that I actually promoted and invited people who I didn't know, you know, and this was in maybe 2010. And I had already been working in the community for free for many, many years, decades. And in that first class, someone asked me, Pankezani, where did you learn all this? And then all of the fear, the reason why I hadn't taught sooner, of I'm not old enough, I'm not an elder. I was in my 20s, early 20s, you know. I'm not an elder. This is not scientifically proven, although I was thinking in terms of Western science, right? And so I remember that feeling come over me like, oh, from my abuela, you know, like it's just like little old me and my little old abuela. And then everyone was like, wow, that's amazing. And just feeling validation from people who paid money to come learn from me without knowing me, without seeing the decades of work that I had been doing, like just feeling the automatic trust and validation of your abuela's legit, your medicine is legit, your lineage is legit, because it is, because you are, right? It made me feel, it helped me heal on a whole other level outside of the Western science paradigm. And a lot of us in the healing world, we tend to sometimes take on that ethnocentric view of Western science as the science. And it is necessary and it is a tool. And we have 4,500 years of time-tested science. And that science is Indigenous science. Western science is very new, and it's actually catching up to Indigenous science today. And we see that through the constant articles that are being released, like sage smoke actually kills like 98% of pathogens in a room, you know, like all these little studies coming out where now that Indigenous healing is gaining traction on a broader spectrum due to just technology and mass dissemination of information. Now that it's gaining traction, it's almost like we're worthy of being studied. This is worthy of being looked into. And so this is why I like to look at Indigenous science outside of the paradigm of Western science. And I see them as, I want to say separate but equal. But I see them as two separate bodies of knowledge, and they each have their place. And the only part where there isn't equity is the part that Western science brings with it, the ethnocentrism, right? So if we get rid of that, I feel like it'll be such an easy transition for people of color to really merge our identities and intersect who we are as healers and practitioners and scientists in a way where that feels good to us.
I love that. One, I just want to say the birds chirping in your environment is just really adding to the ambiance. But thank you for saying that. Yeah, you know, your credentials that you were chosen. You were chosen by your abuela to carry this knowledge and those that came before your abuela, right? Your credential is simply that you were chosen, and the training that you receive is just refining that gift that you already have. So what a beautiful way to lead with that.
Yeah, and it's also like seeing technology as a tool. So when I grew up learning, no one was doing this online. No one was teaching at the scale that I was teaching. I had to use my imagination and follow my spirit and be like, okay, spirit's telling me I got to teach online. Spirit's telling me I got to do this, got to do that. And this was like a decade before folks really got into it, you know? So it's like trusting your intuition and trusting that we have modern tools as ancient people with ancient worldviews.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Dr. Mariel Bouquet, would love to hear from you.
Yes, my goodness. I'm just so filled by all of you. I feel like whenever we enter these spaces, there is a collective affirmation that happens for all of us. That's just so beautiful and so filling. And I'm just kind of in that, you know, and I hope we can all be in that. You know, my journey has been very similar to the Brujas. I have, you know, social sciences, my background as well, more specifically psychology, that was created and concretized under a very Eurocentric lens that did not account for our experiences, right? And so we as individuals that have that experiential knowledge that come in with the knowledge of our communities, our individual knowledge, the knowledge of our communities and our ancestral knowledge, we then have to create, like, we have to create a synthesis, right? I call it like the sancocho, right? Like we like throw everything in there that we know, that's like all a part of what we've learned. Like my abuela's limoncillo tea, that's a part of it, right? In addition to whatever the Freudian perspective is that I was able to learn, right? Like I throw that in the mix and we have to alchemize. We have to be the creators of what it is that we have to then put forward, as myself as a psychologist at least, for really a lot of us healers that, you know, kind of come from that training, a Eurocentric training. We have to alchemize what it is that we can then create for our communities that can be healing towards our communities rather than re-traumatizing. And so a lot of my journey has been around trying to find that middle path where I can integrate all of those places of knowledge. And I think that you know, I've had a lot of moments of ancestral intuition that have definitely tapped into my journey as a clinician. But the communities that I've served have been a very deep source of knowledge for what the community needs. So a lot of my work has been around opening my eyes and ears and heart to what the community is saying is the need, right? Whenever I was in clinical meetings, still working at a hospital in Washington Heights, and we're serving primarily a Latinx community, and people are coming in saying, I was someone who suffered chronic abuse in my life. However, my mother did as well. And so did her mother. And we're creating whatever is happening within this person's life right now, their emotional ailment, we're situating that within a Eurocentric lens. And we're saying, this person has layered trauma, complex trauma. And we're not seeing it as generational, as ancestral, as like someone's voice from generations past continuing to live, and pain from generations past continuing to live in this person's present body. When we're not seeing it as that, then we're missing an opportunity to create really profound healing. And so one of the major ways in which I've been able to give myself leniency to do the work from a holistic perspective has been from listening to what my community members have said is the path towards healing, because we have had that ancestral knowledge from a multitude of years before Western medicine even came to be. So, you know, for us healers and people operating kind of from my perspective in mental health, it is very much an alchemy, a daily alchemy, like just having to create from what's there, from what, you know, community has left for us to really gather.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's such a beautiful word, alchemy. Yeah, you know, and I've heard from clinicians that, you know, a lot of clinicians leave the clinical side altogether because they get more pulled into this spiritual side. And so for you to be able to exist in both paradigms and to do it so beautifully, and, you know, the community that you've built has been incredible. And for all of you panelists, you know, you're doing the work that we need to see, and charging yourself to be thought leaders in this space. It's really what we need right now in this age that we're living in. And so my first question now to Dr. Rodriguez. You've held tons of spaces for women to share and grow and release. What are the common themes that you've come to notice in what women hold in our wombs that are yearning to be released, especially as we talk about, you know, these layers that Dr. Mariel brought up? What are the things that you have noticed that we are keeping in our wombs?
I think one of the first things, there's so many that come to mind. The first one that came through me intuitively is this pressure to settle down and get married and have children. Not only that pressure, but to do it at a certain age. And it's very heteronormative. And it's interesting the way we present ourselves, because for years at the beginning of our platform, I was single. I was in my mid-30s and late 30s single. She was married with a child. So we came from two different worlds, and we attracted different people, even as a collective. But one thing I see is like this pressure and this like effed up notion of time, and like that you're running out of time. You know, today in my personal page on Instagram, I had like a rant because I saw a post about like, you know, millennials, younger millennials going into their 30s, and they're worried and, oh my God, my life is over. And I was like, who said that? And I got this barrage of emails and DMs of people like, I'm 29 and I'm not married. What's wrong with me? My time is up. And it really breaks my heart to hear that, because not only is this notion of marriage and children so central, and then everything else takes a secondary or tertiary role, but then it's like, that's it to measure your worth. So that's something that I see a lot, that I really hope we continue to unpack as a collective. And we understand that, like Dr. Mariel said, these are voices that are passed down, that we carry with us. And it's about time that we start to, like, you know, stop that recording and listen to the voice of intuition, because it's not only affecting like people rushing and thinking that their life is over when they're in their 30s, God forbid their late 30s, but it's prematurely jumping into relationships that may end up toxic, that may end up abusive, and you may end up like recreating these patterns of generational trauma. So that's something that I see a lot. And, you know, then connecting with that person on an intimate level and having sex with them as Kundalini yoginis. You know, we've been trained and taught, and we believe and live it, that sex is the most powerful force in the universe, that Kundalini Shakti, creative energy. And as people with wombs, when we share ourselves with someone, who regardless of who they are, that's an entering of our vessel, and we hold those people's energies. So we have to look at it through that. And then those entities cause womb imbalances. And it all starts from a voice. It's like, ¿cuándo tú te vas a casar? When are you getting married? And when are you having kids? And then you have the first kid, and it's like, tú no puedes dejar ese muchacho solo. You can't leave that little kid by themselves. They need a sibling. And it's this constant like rush to check these boxes that aren't even ours.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, they're not even ours. Whew. Pakistani, this is your jam. Womb wellness, all things womb, right? Can you talk about this shift? So once you unlearn all of that, once you unpack all of the constructs that society has put on us, and you come to know your womb for yourself, can you talk about that shift, that magical moment that happens when a woman connects to their womb? And on the flip side of that, what happens when the womb feels threatened?
Mm-hmm. Whew, I feel that in my womb, in my throat, in my heart. Yeah, that's very personal because I have felt deep awakenings from my womb. First is healing from my mother wounds. A lot of us carry wounds that were passed on generationally. And we carry these hurts, these harms, these traumas, discomforts, beliefs in our core, in our center. And so when we start to let go of societal beliefs, family expectations, and when we start to realize that we are deserving and beyond that, we are owed joy, we are owed comfort, we are owed safety, we are owed our own thriving, right? Then everything falls into place. Sorry, my neighborhood is super loud. Looks like I'm in a quiet oasis, but neighbors, Long Beach. And so, yeah, so we feel lighter when we're tuned into our poder de la matriz. And also, sometimes that comes with struggle. Like you said, what is the, did you say like the feeling of fighting, or what did you call it, Ayla?
The feeling of when your womb feels threatened.
Yeah, when you feel threatened. So living as Indigenous women, as Black Indigenous people of color with uteruses, there are constant threats to the womb. Mm-hmm. Even just like I just got off of a 4-day social media cleanse because like seeing what has been going on in the world was activating my womb and making me feel sad and making me feel heavy, because your womb is not only connected to the wombs directly in your lineage, but there's a global womb, there's the earth womb. And when other mothers and other wombs are in pain, you could feel that, you know. And so how do I give myself tools when I'm feeling this way? How do I give myself tools to not feel constantly activated when there are external attacks against the uterus, you know? So there's a lot of self-protection, practical self-care. We give so much that we need to, every time that we give, how can I give to myself 10 times the way I just gave to this person? That's the amount of self-sustaining energy. Like this is the good place that you want to be at, because we're natural givers, we're natural nurturers, we're natural healers.
What does that practical self-care look like for you?
Yeah, well, I talked about how I left social media. I run half my business on social media. I was like, fuck it, I don't care. Mental health, womb health, like above all.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't plan it. You know, I didn't plan the break that I took. And I'm also planning another full 7-day social media cleanse. And it always involves something bruja-y with, you know, close bruja friends, always. It always involves connecting to the land, connecting to the earth, even if it's just going on a 15-minute walk on the beach, even if it's just going outside and breathing the nighttime air for a few breaths, even if it's just walking around barefoot outside and feeling all the little different textures, laying down in a hammock, swinging, no phone, no sound, just closing my eyes and not feeling like I don't have a plan. Like that spaciousness is very healing. And connecting, if you have a family, connecting with your loved ones. I took last week 2 days off for my mental health, because it was heavy. It was a heavy week, you know, with all the stuff going on. I wanted to be with my babies, seeing how parents were suffering, losing their babies, all that loss. I was like, universe is telling me I need to cherish what I have. So I'm taking 2 days off. And we did all the things together, you know, all the way from going out into nature to like Netflix and chilling, like with snacks together and cuddles. So yeah, those are some things. And I always talk about the more practical stuff like bone broths and teas and vaginal steaming. And those are all amazing practices too. But also it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go above and beyond to practice self-care.
Absolutely. Wow, thank you for that reframe. And yeah, there's so much magic in the stillness, and we forget that. We absolutely forget that. Dr. Mariel, you know, you are a trauma expert, and we felt a lot of that last week. And you've worked with hundreds of people to unpack intergenerational wounds and reclaim a new narrative for themselves. So my question is, what does this process look like specifically for women? And what have you found? What are the commonalities that you found that gets in the way of us women, specifically women of color, from returning back home to ourselves?
Very powerful question. And I think at the center of it all, right, is the narratives that we have succumbed to as a collective, right? The narratives that we have been socialized under that have for a very long time created a suppression in us, individually and collectively, that has made it so that it can be harder for us to tap into our divine feminine. It can be harder for us to tap into intuitively like who we are, even when it comes to really connecting to our womb, like connecting to our womb individually, because for many of us, wombs are centers, healing centers that aren't centers for us to actually reproduce. Some of us have chosen not to mother, right? Some of us have chosen to connect with our wombs in different ways, right? And so like many of us don't have agency and option in deciding that because we have been under this narrative that has been created and fabricated for us. And so a lot of the work that is done in the generational mental health arena is around unlearning, is around bringing you back into your own intuition, bringing you back into your ancestral intuition and all of the ways that you've been disconnected from your true core self and your generational self by way of trauma, because that's what trauma does. It disconnects us from ourselves, from the world, from our spiritual selves, our spiritual connections that we've had for multiple generations. There's a severing that happens in all of that. And it creates for us an unearthing, like we go from being planted and rooted in our true selves to being uprooted. And so a lot of the work has to do with replanting ourselves, becoming a version of ourselves that is both new and ancestral, and merging the two to create alchemize again, right? A form of liberation that is, kind of birthing out of that soil.
Mm. And that unearthing, when you're in that season of things really being unearthed, it can be very disorienting, very much so. And so when you're meeting clients who are in that phase, what does that process look like? And how do you kind of regulate your nervous system again and coming back to yourself?
Well, the first step is actually to regulate the nervous system, which is why I harp on that subject so much on social media. Probably every other post that I put out there has to do with nervous system regulation. The very same when I'm working with people individually. And as I transition into group consultations and coursework, I'm going to be doing the very same, right? We have to provide people with the tools to be able to navigate the healing journey. Mm-hmm. I can't sit with a person for the first time that I'm sitting with them and say, tell me everything that hurts. And for them to then break themselves open, become profoundly raw, and then transition from my office with this rawness that they haven't been given the tools on how to work with. First, I have to equip the person with the tools to regulate, to root, to be able to feel connected to ancestors and the ways in which they can actually access all of that, so that when we get into the breaking open, it doesn't feel like they're losing themselves into an abyss of darkness because they don't know how to bring themselves back into a regulated state. So I first start with the nervous system, and then I transition into the history.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful. It's deep, it's messy work, but yeah, you holding the container for that, you know, that's powerful. Dr. Rodriguez Solomon. So as Afro-Dominican Brujas, there is a history of racial oppression that comes with Afro-Latinx identity. Can you talk about how these wounds that are rooted in societal oppression impact our connection to our spiritual development?
Yeah, that's a very, very important, super important question, because I think it's recently, I think our ancestors and even our parents viscerally lived through the experiences of racialized oppression. But I think it's the younger generations through technology and social media that we're starting, and a lot of research that's coming out, like the epigenetic field that speaks on like how gene expression is morphed or altered through like intergenerational forms of trauma that weather or wear down the body. And it started with research on Holocaust survivors, where 2 generations after a survivor, in the brain of like a child, they found traces of PTSD like symptoms in the brain. And that goes to show that race, just like other forms of oppression, especially racialized oppression, it lives in the body. And I think that now we are starting to understand exactly what is it that systems of oppression that really ostracize people of color, what it does to our bodies. And all of us here are addressing them in one way or the other. And, you know, I think that the gaslighting that happens is something that really continuously can wear down our bodies, because we live through forms of racialized oppression. And then like, just because it's a recent topic, but it can be sensitive for those that are listening, but like these 2 recent mass shootings that happening, the different ways that these 2 beings, you know, they were treated based on their race is an example of just even that when we're watching these images, not only are we traumatized by watching the images, but even seeing the way that the 2 perpetrators were treated differently. I think that, and to tie that all in with why we call ourselves brujas, I think intuitively I'm led to that. I think that the irony is that because of systems of oppression, particularly racism, a lot of our older generations were pulled away from medicine that was very important, because those types of medicines were rooted and embodied by people of color. So I'm sure that the anti-indigeneity and anti-Blackness that pervades Latin America, that played into our parents feeling shunned or shunning people that practice traditional forms of medicine, because in a Eurocentric lens, they were not seen as valid, right? The point that was made earlier. And I wanna just confirm, Pakistani, right? You mentioned it earlier that a lot of our ancestral medicine has been ostracized, but I think that we're here, the 4 of us, for all those listening as well, to reclaim this magic, not only out of our ancestral lineage, but also outside of these legacies of white supremacy that have kept us from our magic, and I think, and healing. And I think just to close off the question, one thing that I learned and I shared intuitively through the years is the grief that my sister and I collectively have had to express in knowing that we have a pantheon of ancestors that we'll probably never pray to, that a candle wasn't lit for them, because for our family, they denied a lot of their Black ancestry, their Haitian ancestry. So to think that we have some, collectively from a Latin American, Latinx context, we have hundreds of thousands of ancestors that are not prayed to, or candles are lit, or prayers are sent to them off of the sheer fact that they're denied existence because of anti-indigeneity and anti-Blackness. So I think the work that we're all doing is so revolutionary, because not only is it healing the body, but it's healing the spirit as well.
That was so profound. I'm just sitting with that. Wow. Yeah, there's so many layers to it. And, you know, there's this thing called like the wheel of oppression, or the identity wheel or something. And it's talking about how, like, you know, different layers of your identity are either rooted in privilege or rooted in oppression. And so when more of your identities are rooted in oppression, the layers keep compacting on top of each other. And Dr. Maria, you talk about healing as a multi-dimensional experience. And so being Afro-Latina and, you know, living in this society, yeah, your healing is multi-dimensional. Can you talk about these layers and how they impact each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's layers of healing, as you're mentioning, right? And the more identities where we are held at the margins, the more of those identities that intersect, the greater the pain, the greater the intersecting pain. However, also the greater intersecting perception of reality. Individuals that hold identities that are at the margin have a greater understanding of what is real in society. And so with that, of course, you know, as James Baldwin mentioned, like if you are in a state of consciousness, and if you are a person that holds consciousness, especially because you're at the margins, that means that there is a greater propensity for you to have rage. He did not say it like that, but he said a version of that, right? But I think we have to understand that the intersecting identities, as beautiful as they are and as beautifully human as they make us, I love everything that I am, right? But I also understand that being a woman, being Black, being Latina, being an immigrant, coming from a financially impoverished community and background, that all of those things intersect to create intersecting stories, each of which hold pain, right? And the same goes for, I've been very blessed to have almost 100% of the individuals that I've served in the time that I've been serving as a clinician have been BIPOC identified, mostly Latinx. And there's an abundance of intersecting identities there as well. And so what we have always been holding have been a lot of the pains of the intersecting identities that they have held, the intersecting identities that their parents have held, the intersecting identities that their grandparents have held, that their ancestors have held. I mean, we're talking about an amalgamation of pain that is so wide and being all contained within one body. And so the work that we're doing cannot just be like, tell me how you're feeling this week. That's not enough, right? Yeah. It's just not enough. And a part of what allowed me to see that it wasn't enough is because when I was still working in hospital systems, and mind you, I'm working with all Latinx communities, right? And because I'm a Spanish speaking clinician, of course, I'm very, very much honored to have been placed in this way, but I would be working in the Spanish language with monolingual Spanish speakers. And so as a result, you know, I'm seeing people that are in treatment for 10, 20 years and not getting any better. And so what disservice could we be doing as clinicians, not seeing the person holistically and globally with all of the pain that they're coming in with, and also applying a layered mechanism of healing their pain, which is why I operate as a holistic psychologist, because it isn't enough to be verbalizing and talk therapy and then to send someone home with a body that's on fire or with a spirit that's disjointed. It's just not enough, right? And so the work that I believe any clinician operating in a mental health position has to do has to be layered work that taps into the mind, the body, and the spirit, and intersects all of those pieces to treat the whole person or help the person understand how to elevate themselves in all of those dimensions.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. It really is layered. It is a web, and it's important to have clinicians such as yourself who see that, who just doesn't see, you know, our pain as isolated incidents, but as this interconnected web that makes us who we are. We're beautiful, we're layered, all these identities. But like you said, every single identity carries a level of rage. And so that, what do you do with all that fire that's in your body?
So much fire. And even like when you think about, you know, the fire that we carry within different contexts. If I'm here, the fire that I carry, I haven't gone to the Dominican Republic in, I think 12 years, probably too long. But when I'm there, I'm so charged with my families and my communities and my ancestral, like everything just becomes so powerful within me. And I have to prepare my heart and spirit for all of that. Right. And I think that there is a different way that we experience, especially as Latinx folks and people that have transplanted to other parts of the world. There are ways in which we experience these multitude of energies and emotional pains in our homelands and, you know, wherever we have transplanted to. So it just becomes so much more layered the more that you add, you know, to the perspective. And so, you know, I do think that we have to look at it from that multi-layered perspective as a result.
Thank you so much for that reframe. And thank you all, you know, for sharing all of your beautiful insight. I do want to open the floor because we had some Q&A. And so, amigas, if you have questions, we're going to reserve the last 10 minutes for your questions. Please drop them in the chat. So this first question, they did not want to be on camera, but the question is, what are some healing modalities that you all recommend to help us collectively and individually heal and alchemize the grief many of us are feeling right now with recent events in Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo? And we can open up the floor for either one of you to answer.
The first thing that comes to mind intuitively is joy, and not joy in the context of denial, but joy in spite of the grief and the pain and the collective ache in the earth's womb that we're experiencing. My sister and I, we love to say that joy is our ultimate form of resistance.
So one thing that I practice is allowing myself to fully feel, giving myself permission. In my family, grief is not dealt with very well. So I like to feel my grief. I like to cry. I like to be open and be like, I'm sad right now. I have like just different, even like group texts, like, oh, like I'm feeling so sad. Like we help each other work. We're friends who help each other work through our grief, fully feel it, acknowledge it, let it go. And yes, it's going to come back because everything is a circle. You know, as Indigenous people, you have all these feelings in this circle, and every one of these feelings gets a turn. And so moving through grief, and now I'm happy and there's joy, and there's going to be inevitable grief again. But right now I'm going to also be fully present in gratitude. What am I grateful for? And this is one of the reasons why when I was grieving, you know, the loss of the children that were murdered, this is why after I fully allowed myself to acknowledge, I was like, okay, I'm going to be in my gratitude. What am I grateful for? Well, number one, right now, I'm grateful for my children, my family, like that's so present for me right now. So I'm going to bask in it. I'm going to relish in it. I'm going to turn off everything else and just be present with this joy and this gratitude.
Thank you for that. Dr. Maria, did you want to go next?
Yes, and I know that the Brujas will trail into this a little bit once they get a chance to again, but I just want to reiterate that joy is, I mean, like just scientifically, like we also know that laughter can actually invigorate like certain areas of the brain that are going to be really helpful and in the long term can even like structurally change the brain to just embody, you know, more of those kinds of emotions. So it is, even if you're just like forcefully laughing, like popping in like something that makes you laugh just to kind of get it out. I think that it is really essential piece. But one piece that I like to add is, I know that some of us live in the concrete jungle and maybe like so many areas, right, that where maybe like there's more concrete than green, but just like any patch of green that you can get yourself into And I mean, not just like talking to your plants, but like going somewhere where you can put your feet on the ground and it's like rocks and grass, like literally going into nature and just experiencing the vastness of what is out there that is beyond us in our very human faulty form. There's so much that is just perfectly orchestrated out in nature, and being able to transition our minds into, just for a few minutes, into what's out there, and really mindfully getting into nature by just feeling the cool of the grass and the sensations and things that I think are very easy to take for granted as something that can elevate our mental health, but it can really do so much good for us in the short term and in the long term. But some of the things that I tend to get into with folks are also around nervous system regulation, right? Like beyond, I think for most of us, we've already heard take a breath about as many times as we can take in a lifetime, right? But there are other ways in which our nervous system, especially the ventral vagal nerve within the nervous system, which elicits a parasympathetic response, which is that relaxation response, that can be elicited, activated on our behalf, right, in times like this, so that we can then really regulate our nervous system that is, remember, not just ours, but ancestral. And so we can do things like rocking, which I love to do, right? Some people actually rock just by way of intuition, because they know that rocking will create that rhythmic response inside of their bodies that will actually create a relaxation prompt for their nervous system. Humming is another way that you can elicit the ventral vagal response. And if you can think of, how ancestors utilize humming as a way to create a soothing experience for a baby or for someone who was grieving, right? Like, there are reasons why intuitively our ancestors knew to do this. So let's bring back the very gifts that they left us with that we've been disconnected from. And so maybe I'll just leave us with those three, which I love and I do myself.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Did you want to finish your thought, Brujas?
Yeah, our apologies. It just dropped, but we're here. Mariela, I love that. And I'm sure that those that are tuning in can attest most that we've done one, two, or all three of those things you listed just intuitively, the rocking and the humming in particular. But yeah, the point that has been reiterated is joy. Joy in the context of pain can be very liberating. And with intention, Miguelina and I are very big on intentionally celebrating small and big milestones, to the point where our respective partners, my husband in particular, is always like, what are y'all celebrating now? And we're like, it's the first Tuesday of the unofficial summer. And then on Friday, we'll be like, it is the first Friday of, like, we'll find even small things to look at and celebrate, going out, dancing, journaling, writing. That's ways that we celebrate. One thing that came as you were sharing, Mariel, about nature is that my first official entryway into reclaiming my ancestral ways of being was through Zen Buddhism. Very randomly, I was reading a book about the Tao, right? Not randomly, in my late teens in college. And one thing I remember distinctively that they said about regulating and grounding is to be in nature, but in nature in a way where nature is overpowering you. So a beach or a big mountain or standing in front of a big tree, because not only do they carry the negative ions or the positive ions that help to our auras to be released of a lot of the electromagnetic waste that we embody through cell phones and computers and whatnot, but it also allows us to see how small we are in the grander scheme of things. And that helps us subconsciously to realize that our problems may seem so big and so profoundly painful, and we're allowed to feel that pain and to feel that grief. But when we put it into a larger perspective, we realize that it's so small compared to the grander scheme of the universe. And lastly, I put a lot of my faith in God, right? a lot of my faith in God. I put a lot of my pain onto like God's bosom, onto God's. I embody God as like a woman, but God is not a physical entity. But I also project a lot of my pain onto a source that's bigger than me, because I know that it could carry a lot of humanity's sorrows.
And I just, that was beautiful, Gri. Thank you. Pakistani said something, and when we logged on, we caught that it was about gratitude, and I can't stress that enough. Really, gratitude. Thank you. Like I learned years ago, like if you're ever stuck and you don't know a prayer or you're overwhelmed, just saying thank you is enough. Really looking at our lives. And I'm like, thank you for nail polish. And I know it may seem insignificant, but it's the fact that I have the means to go and walk and get this nail polish, and I have the desire to paint my nails, just stuff like that, to greater things like our health and our ability, you know, to be mobile. And sometimes I even give thanks for the shitty stuff, because as I think all of us, the four of us, the five of us here know, those shittier moments in life, fast forward, they had a lot of medicine. So definitely being in a state of gratitude.
Thank you all for sharing that. We can all take something from what you shared, and I love that. They're very tangible things, and they're free things. Joy, gratitude, alchemy. These are things that you can experience by just choosing to. It's not something you have to go out and buy or look for or seek, or something that, you know, others have more than you. You have that power to access that right now. And in the spirit of us, you know, the We All Grow team prepping for the Sanctuary of Joy Summit this fall, you know, we've really been writing on this theme of joy, and we need that so much. So thank you all for sharing that. We run out of time. I wish we could go on and on and on, but this was so beautiful and so needed. My last question is, you know, if you had to think of one word that you're going to carry with you through this week, knowing that we just felt tragedy after tragedy, heaviness after heaviness last week, what is one word that you're carrying with you today through the end of this week?
I mean, my word is now, or presence.
Love that.
Ease.
I have 2 words: collective affirmation.
Thank you.
Mine is grounded.
Now, ease, collective affirmation, grounded. Amigas, feel free to write what your word is in the chat and carry that with you through the rest of the week. Thank you again for spending time with us here at We All Grow Amigas today. Pakistani, Dr. Mariel Bouquet, Dr. Rodriguez Solomon. This is such a gift. And thank you, Amigas, for always showing up in this space. And like I said in the beginning, you know, you choose community. You choose who you want to surround yourself with in these moments of collective grief, and you chose us. So thank you for being here. We really value your time. We value your amigahood. Jen will be sharing in the chat how you can follow each of our panelists and our work. In the meantime, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you at the next one, amigas. Thank you.
Bye, y'all. Peace.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.